And now moving forward to your, what I call your North Star now, which is again, losing money, but in a very methodical way.
Yeah.
Tell us one way to describe it.
Yeah.
You give, a minimum 33% of your income to, high impact charities every year as, a member of the Earn to Give movement. Just tell us a little bit about that and how it came into your life, because it's incredible. It really is.
So I first came across this idea actually after I had retired from poker. And basically in the few years after I quit poker, I had given away a lot of the money that I had and wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my life. Wasn't really sure what motivated me. Because one thing that I knew from a young age, being a poker player, being quite successful very young, is one, I knew that making a lot of money didn't make me happy. And it didn't seem to make other people I knew very happy. And second, that nevertheless, I think that I am somebody who is fairly good at making money. Like I think I have the right kind of skills and temperament to be good at it, but I wasn't particularly motivated by making money for myself. And so I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my life and what would actually be meaningful and have an impact on the world. Because that's one thing that I knew that poker didn't have. Poker is sort of unique in being a true zero-sum game, where the only way that you make money in poker is by taking money from somebody else. You're not creating any value in the world of poker. And I hated that about my poker career. And when I learned about the ideas behind what's called effective altruism and the idea behind earning to give, the idea that basically if you're somebody who can earn a lot of money, you can actually have a disproportionate amount of impact in the world by donating that money to very high impact charities. And especially if you're somebody who can make a lot of money, then you can donate enough so that, if you imagine you yourself went to go work at a high impact charity, you might command a salary of, let's say 50K, 60K, 70K, some amount of money. If you can donate enough money, if you can donate, let's say twice that amount of money, then actually you can pay for even more people to go do the work you would have otherwise done for that charity yourself. And that to me made complete sense. That if I really want to maximize my impact on the world, then the places where the money that I make can go the farthest and do the most good are places where I'm not even necessarily that well equipped to go and help them. But many charities in the world are constrained by capital. And so that was what made me decide that, okay, I think this makes sense. I want to devote my life to earning to give. So I'm going to go and try to pursue a high income career so that I can donate money to charity. And that was actually what led me to the tech industry, because I'd always had an interest in tech. I'd always found, the internet companies. I grew up on technology. I always found them fascinating, but I never thought that I would have any role or any value that I could give to any of these companies. And so it was kind of in a series of kind of strokes of luck / realization that I ended up finding my way into learning how to code, going into the tech industry, and starting my career there. And the first job that I got in 2015, as soon as I got it, I started donating 33% of my income to high impact charities, and I've been doing that ever since.
And the high impact bit, because one of our audience questions was, how is that actually calculated? From Ben Brethwick, who's at Hayes McIntyre doing accounting. And that is, it's like scientifically, right? Like, I know it's quite interesting. Is it?
Yeah. So the way that I like to frame the way that I think about impact is that, like you mentioned, I think for a lot of the things that we do in life, like let's say if you're dealing with your finances or you're thinking about, advertising or whatever, people are very, very statistically, scientifically driven, right? We think about like A/B testing, we think about, maximizing this or that or blah, blah, blah. And we try to be extremely rigorous in the way that we think about getting things done in the world of business, in the world of science, and all these different domains that we consider very important to public enterprise. But then when it comes to charity, for some reason, people like to sort of turn their brains off. And they like to stop thinking with the same level of rigor and attention. And instead, they start saying like, well, this seems like a really nice thing to do, so let's go do that. And to me, this is totally backwards, because charity and helping people is one of the most important things that we do. So if anything, we should be even more rigorous and apply an even higher standard of care when we think about how to allocate resources to actually helping the people in the world who are the worst off. And so when I think about what it means to allocate, to allocate resources to the highest impact charities in the world, the question really is, measured dollar for dollar, what is the most good that can be done? What is the way to help people the most efficiently and effectively, given the limited resources that we have available to us? That question, of course, is a very, very difficult question to answer. And there are a lot of really smart people who are taking a scientific framework and a very rigorous framework to thinking about, if you normalize, the value of human life, and if you assume that all human lives are equally valuable, where and how can you minimize the amount of human suffering the most for a given amount of resources? And there have been many proposals. So there's an organization called GiveWell, which is based in San Francisco, that does this. They basically try to use a very rigorous scientific framework to look at all the highest impact charities around the world and try to see, given the marginal dollar, so not given, it's a question not of what charities do the most good. That's actually a separate question of, if you have $1 to give to a charity, where should that dollar go? Because of course, some of those charities already do all that good, and you giving them another dollar isn't going to make them do more of what they already do necessarily, right? So for example, the Red Cross gives out tons of vaccines all over the world, and those vaccines are incredibly, incredibly, incredibly valuable. But if you go give another $1 million to the Red Cross, well, it's already giving out all those vaccines. It doesn't need $1 million to go give out more of those vaccines. It's already doing all that. So if you give it $1 million, well, it's going to find the next best project that it needs that's not already funded, and it's going to give the $1 million to that. And so the question is always at the margin, for the next, dollar or $100, $1,000 that you're going to donate to charity, what is that $1,000 going to actually do that wouldn't otherwise get done? That question is very hard to answer, but there are smart people out there trying to answer it. And that's what I look to when I say donating money to high impact charities.
Yeah, it's incredible. And quite frankly, I think it's quite inspiring for everyone. Something, I personally would like to aim for. I think that's pretty cool. And talking of, rigor and the margin, let's get into, the phase that is allowing you to do this. You're now a professional software developer. You learned to do that very well in a year. How did you do that? What did you do that all these millions of people, perhaps couldn't do? What was your process? I don't know, but we'll start there.
So I became a software developer. So I'll give the very abridged story. So basically, I became a software developer basically because I realized that at the time I didn't have any skills that were valuable in the tech industry, and I really wanted to enter into the tech industry because I felt that it was the most vibrant industry that I could potentially take part in. And I remember at the time when I was living in Texas, and I wanted to move to San Francisco because, of course, that's the nexus of where tech is happening in the US. And my dream was that I wanted to work at a software consultancy. And I thought, if I can make it to a software consultancy, then I've made it. Then I've built a career in tech, I've gone the distance. Yeah, exactly. I really didn't know that I could do it. I thought that was an impossibly large goal. And so I ended up applying, when I had this idea that I was going to learn how to code, I applied to every single, I started learning about the different paths of learning how to code. One of them that I learned about was this thing called the Coding Bootcamp, which is a sort of 12-week program, 3 months long, where basically you kind of go into some kind of physical space. Obviously, it's not physical now during the time of COVID. At the time it was. Yes. You go into sort of physical space and you just, you eat, drink, breathe, code all day for 3 months straight, essentially. Yeah. All you are doing is you are under this very, very rigorous learning environment, basically getting shoved down your throat the same level of education that somebody would normally get in a CS career, or CS education in 2 years or 4 years. Instead, you get all of that in 3 months. And so I was like, okay, this is clearly the highest velocity way to learn this stuff and to get it under my belt. So what I did is the next day I applied to every single coding bootcamp in the Bay Area. I started studying for them as fast as I can to try to get, because the very best ones have entrance exams. I ended up passing the entrance exams. I got in. I moved to San Francisco. I was living in this international housing with this tiny, tiny, tiny apartment with like a bunk bed of another guy who was going to the same coding boot camp, sleeping above me. And all I was doing, I was there basically from 9 a.m. to midnight almost every day, just coding and coding and coding and coding, and trying to, honestly, like being driven by the fear that I wasn't going to make it, the fear that I wasn't going to be good enough, that not having a background in technology, not having gone to like an elite university, not having any of the stuff going for me that other folks, remember my roommate, he was a mechanical engineer at Dartmouth, so it's like, okay, going from mechanical engineering at Dartmouth into CS, like naturally the moment that he'd gotten out of the program, he was getting people hitting him up saying like, hey, why don't you come work for us? Why don't you come, as a software engineer, like you're a natural fit. For me, I went to a state school. I studied, English and philosophy. I had absolutely, I was a professional poker player, dropped out of school. Like my resume looked like complete dog shit.
That's an ungenerous way of describing it. I'm not sure.
I mean, to the perspective of it, I can guarantee you, to the perspective of anybody who's looking at my resume in the software world, nobody thought it was in any way a fit as a potential software engineer. And so I remember what ended up happening was at the end of that 3-month program, I actually, the folks who ran the school, they'd been watching me, they got to know me, and they actually made me an offer to actually join the educational staff and help teach the program that was running at the coding bootcamp. And so I accepted their offer, and that was where basically my first job when I first started earning to give. And then a few months later, they asked me if I wanted to become director of product for the coding school, which was sort of a mixture between the teaching, but then also like helping them develop programs and stuff like that. So I ended up doing that. So that was sort of the beginning of this very weird, tumultuous road that's led me into the career I'm in today.
The thing that I really want to try and understand though is because these boot camps, a lot of people go to them, and not everyone is asked to, teach the course. Do you know what I mean? After a very short period of time. And a lot of these people already have a technical background. Mm-hmm. So what is it, do you think you did differently, the way you approached the learning that enabled you to accelerate that process so much more?
That's a tough question for me to answer briefly. But I think like I have learned how to teach myself things much better than I think almost anybody else I know. In large part because I had to teach myself poker. I was, essentially anybody who's a poker player for the most part, at least back then, was entirely self-taught. And like the ability to understand the way that your brain actually learns things. Most people, I think, don't really understand how learning works. They don't really understand the difference between understanding something and being able to get by in a conversation about something. So, for example, I don't know, I could go on all day about this. So I'm trying to find something.
We'll cut the interview hard at the end. This is just super interesting. Feel free to elaborate as much as you need. Yeah,
I think like, so for example, if somebody might tell me like, okay, I understand how magnetism works, right? And so that I might, if you engage them in a conversation, you're like, oh yeah, so this magnetic force does this and blah, blah, blah. They'll like nod their head and they'll be like, yeah, yeah. And maybe they can even complete your sentence. But if you sort of ask them to like explain very clearly how magnetism works, a lot of people fall apart. They actually can't untangle like what they actually understand about the underlying mechanics of this thing. And they mistake the ability to feel comfortable in a conversation with understanding. And I mean, I think this is something that many, many people, myself included, are guilty of all the time. But it's extremely important to understand the difference between being able to get by in a conversation and truly understanding something. And if you don't truly understand something, it's like, are alarm bells going off in your head telling you, I don't really understand this thing, and I need to go and complete my mental model of it before I'm ready to move on? For a lot of people, the answer is no. There's no alarm bell going off in their head, showing them when they really do understand something and when they just have a like vague cloud of understanding what's going on there. And that difference is incredibly important, because when it comes to understanding an entire domain, like coding, right? Like if you miss one concept, let's say you're trying to learn, SQL, and you kind of, you sort of roughly understand what's going on with joins, but you don't totally get it, but it's enough to get by and you can guess the right answer some of the time, right? lots and lots of people, their instinct is, you know what, let's just keep going. Let's just like drive that through, and they kind of get by, and they get an A on the test, but they like missed a few of them, and then they go on to the next thing, right? Like your ability, like it's not always wrong to do that. I'm not claiming that the right thing to do is to understand each and everything that you ever get exposed to, because of course nobody can do that. That's an impossible goal, right? But the really important thing is that you need to understand what you do and don't understand. If you don't have that, then there's no fucking way that you are going to be able to build for yourself a foundation in something entirely on your own without somebody else being there to help you fill the gaps. If you can't see where the gaps are, then you're screwed.
Okay, my final question then, because I know you've got to jump ship super soon.
Yes.
And this links to an audience question from Lucy Smith, who's data lead at London Plus. She is dyslexia, and she struggles to code. And I think just going one moment deeper into what you were just saying could help with this, which is then how do you validate what people think they know, but then they actually don't know? How do you do that? How do you go, oh, I thought I knew this thing, but actually I really don't understand it. I need to dig deeper.
The easiest way to validate whether or not you understand something is to try to explain it. So, especially try to explain it to somebody else. So, obviously part of explaining things well is being able to teach. And not everybody's good at teaching, not everybody's good at communicating, right? But the ability to actually untangle, like, you can sort of imagine like the idea in your head is like in this big soup, or it's this big spaghetti. Like, and what you need to be able to do to explain something is to sort of grab a strand and start pulling on it and get the whole thing out and show that like, yeah, this is how this thing works, right? And sometimes when you start pulling, you realize you hit a knot and you don't know how to pull that knot out. You don't know how to actually untangle that part of like, how does this thing really work, right? Like sometimes the person who's listening will not understand what you're saying, and that's fine. That's just a matter of being good at communicating. But if you can't get there, if you start trying to explain this thing and you run into a wall, you're just like, fuck, I'm pulling, but I actually don't know how to get this knot undone. Like there's something I'm actually missing about my underlying mental model of this domain. That is the only way that you're going to know that you don't actually understand it.
Amazing. So keep trying to explain it until you realize you can't, and then keep going till you can explain it, pretty much.
That's right.
Haseeb, this has been absolutely awesome. I've got a 5-second cooldown for you now. It's just a quick bit of word association. It's very fun, sure. I promise. Yep. I'm going to say 5 words. Just tell me the first thing that comes into your head.
Go for it. Okay.
Work.
Life.
Success.
Success. Hope.
Learning.
Hard.
Relationships.
Hard to.
Your superpower.
Learning.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. Absolutely brilliant.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Corbin.
Likewise. And huge shout out to Jose as well in the studio, helping us make this happen. Thank you very much. All right. Take it easy.
All right. Thanks, man.